The divorce papers sat unsigned on the kitchen table for 3 weeks before Vivian finally picked up the pen. There was no screaming, no shattered plates against walls, no discovery of lipstick-stained collars or secret phone calls, just silence that had grown so thick between them it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Graham had moved his things out on a Tuesday afternoon while she was at work, leaving only a note that said he thought this was best for both of them. She had stared at his empty closet that evening, hangers swaying slightly from the air conditioning, and felt nothing but a hollow kind of relief. Their marriage had been good once, more than good. They had met at a corporate training seminar 9 years ago, both ambitious and driven, both believing they could build something extraordinary together. And they had, for a while. A beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, successful careers, dinner parties where other couples looked at them with what Vivian thought was admiration. But somewhere between the promotions and the mortgage payments and the endless cycle of work, sleep, repeat, they had stopped seeing each other, really seeing each other. Conversations became transactional. Did you pay the electric bill? What time is your meeting? Can you pick up milk on your way home? They moved around each other like polite strangers sharing an apartment, and neither of them had the energy to fight against the current pulling them apart. Vivian signed the papers on a Thursday morning, her hand steady. Graham had already signed his portion. They met at the lawyer's office, shook hands, and walked out into separate lives. No tears, no accusations, just two people acknowledging what had already been true for longer than either wanted to admit. Her best friend Iris, a therapist who had seen her share of messy divorces, called it the most civil separation she had ever witnessed. Vivian wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an indictment of how little they had left to fight for. The first month alone was strange. The house felt too big, too quiet. She would wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore, then remember and pull her hand back. She threw herself into work with an intensity that worried her colleagues. 14-hour days became normal. Weekends disappeared into client presentations and strategic planning sessions. Iris gently suggested therapy, but Vivian brushed it off. She was fine. She was handling it. She didn't need to sit in some office talking about her feelings when there was nothing left to feel. But the dreams started around week 6. Not nightmares exactly, just fragments. Graham's laugh from their honeymoon in Maine. The way he used to leave post-it notes on the bathroom mirror with terrible jokes. His hand on the small of her back at parties. A silent anchor in crowded rooms. She would wake from these dreams with tears on her face and no understanding of why her body was grieving something her mind had already accepted. During the day, she was fine, functional, professional. But at 3 a.m, alone in their bed that was now just her bed, something inside her seemed to be trying to tell her something she didn't want to hear. Work became her sanctuary. She took on a major project at the marketing firm where she had worked for 6 years, leading a team through a campaign that required absolute focus. Her boss praised her dedication. Her team followed her lead without question. She was good at this, at being in control, at solving problems that had clear solutions. Unlike marriage, unlike whatever had gone wrong between her and Graham, unlike the growing suspicion that maybe the divorce had been too easy, too clean, too much like two people running away from something they were both too afraid to name. Iris invited her to a dinner party on a Saturday evening in late autumn. Vivian almost declined. Social gatherings felt exhausting now, full of well-meaning questions about how she was doing and pitying looks she pretended not to notice. But something in Iris's voice made her say yes. The dinner was small, just 6 people around Iris's dining table, candles flickering, wine flowing, conversation moving from politics to movies to childhood memories. Vivian found herself laughing for the first time in months, really laughing, at a story one of the other guests told about a disastrous camping trip. On the drive home, something shifted. She realized she had spent 3 hours not thinking about Graham, not performing the role of the recently divorced woman holding it together, just being herself. And in that realization came another one, sharp and unwelcome. She had no idea who she was anymore, without the marriage to define her. Not just without Graham, but without the structure of being someone's wife, someone's partner, someone's other half. For 9 years, she had been Vivian and Graham, and now she was just Vivian, and she had no map for this territory. The panic attack hit her at a red light 2 blocks from her house. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as her chest tightened, breath coming in short gasps. The light turned green, but she couldn't move. A car honked behind her. She managed to pull into a parking lot, hands shaking, heart racing like it was trying to escape her ribcage. She had read about panic attacks, had even sat through a presentation on workplace mental health, but knowing the clinical definition did nothing to stop the terror flooding through her. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, her breathing slowed. She sat in the car, embarrassed and confused, wondering what the hell was wrong with her. She didn't tell anyone about the panic attack. Not Iris, not her mother who called every Sunday with forced cheerfulness, not the concerned colleague who asked if she was sleeping enough. Vivian added it to the growing list of things she was fine about, and went back to work on Monday with her armor firmly in place. But the cracks were showing, even if no one else could see them yet. She started having trouble sleeping, lying awake, counting the hours until dawn. Food lost its taste. Coffee became fuel rather than pleasure. She looked at herself in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the woman staring back, all sharp edges and hollow eyes. Iris finally cornered her 3 months after the divorce was finalized. They met for lunch at a small cafe downtown, and before Vivian could deflect with work stories and surface-level updates, Iris leaned across the table and said, "Talk to me. Really talk to me." And something in Vivian broke, not dramatically, not with tears or raised voices, but quietly, like a dam finally giving way after holding back too much for too long. She told Iris about the panic attack, about the dreams, about waking up every morning with this weight on her chest that had nothing to do with missing Graham and everything to do with a fear she couldn't name. Iris listened without judgment, her therapist training and genuine friendship creating a space where Vivian could finally be honest about how not fine she actually was. "Have you talked to Graham at all?" Iris asked gently. Vivian shook her head. They had agreed to a clean break. No contact except for necessary legal or financial matters. It had seemed like the mature thing to do at the time, the healthy boundary that would let them both move on. But now, sitting across from Iris, Vivian wondered if maybe they had been too quick to cut all ties, too eager to pretend 9 years could be neatly filed away like completed paperwork. That night, Vivian did something she had avoided for months. She opened the box of photographs she had shoved in the back of her closet after Graham moved out. Wedding photos, vacation snapshots, candid moments captured by friends at gatherings. She studied them like archaeological evidence of a civilization she no longer understood. In every picture, they looked happy. They looked in love. So, where had it gone? How did 2 people who smiled at each other like that end up signing divorce papers in silence? The question haunted her as she repacked the box, but this time she left it on her dresser instead of hiding it away. Winter arrived with unexpected ferocity, blanketing the city in snow that forced everything to slow down. Vivian found herself working from home more often, the commute too treacherous to justify. The isolation should have bothered her, but instead it felt oddly appropriate, like the weather was matching her internal landscape. She set up her laptop at the kitchen table, the same table where the divorce papers had sat unsigned, and tried to focus on campaign strategies and client demands. But her mind kept wandering to places she had forbidden it to go. She started seeing a therapist in January. Not Iris, who had offered multiple times, but someone Iris recommended. A woman named Dr. Eleanor Hartwell who specialized in life transitions and identity reconstruction. Vivian hated the clinical terms, hated admitting she needed help, hated the vulnerability of sitting in that quiet office with its neutral walls and strategically placed box of tissues. But she went every Thursday at 4 in the afternoon and slowly, painfully, began to excavate the ruins of her marriage. Dr. Hartwell asked questions Vivian had never considered. Not about Graham or what went wrong, but about her. About who she had been before the marriage. About the dreams she had set aside. About the parts of herself she had quietly buried to make the relationship work. Vivian realized with disturbing clarity that she couldn't remember the last time she had done something just for herself. Something that brought her joy rather than productivity. She had spent 9 years being efficient, being a good partner, being the kind of wife who kept everything running smoothly. But who had she been underneath all that performance? The assignment Dr. Hartwell gave her seemed absurd at first. Write down 5 things you loved doing before you met Graham. 5 things that made you feel alive. Vivian sat at her kitchen table that evening, pen hovering over blank paper, and felt tears of frustration building. She couldn't think of a single thing. How was that possible? How had she lost herself so completely that she couldn't even remember what brought her joy? She finally wrote down painting, though she hadn't picked up a brush in over a decade. Had written down hiking, though her hiking boots had been gathering dust in the garage since the wedding. Had written down playing piano, though they had never even owned a piano because Graham said it would take up too much space. The list felt like evidence of a crime she had committed against herself. February brought a thaw, both literal and metaphorical. Vivian bought a small easel and some basic painting supplies, feeling foolish as she carried them into her house. She set everything up in the spare bedroom, the one that had been meant for a child that never came. Another conversation they had avoided until it became just another silence between them. She stared at the blank canvas for 20 minutes before making the first stroke. The painting was terrible, clumsy and amateurish, but something loosened in her chest as color spread across white space. She painted for 3 hours straight, losing track of time, emerging with aching shoulders and paint-splattered clothes, and something that almost felt like peace. At work, she started setting boundaries she never had before. Left at 5:30 instead of 7. Declined weekend meetings that weren't truly urgent. Her boss commented on it, concerned she was losing her edge, but Vivian stood firm. She was learning, slowly, that her value wasn't measured in overtime hours and constant availability. It was a radical thought for someone who had built her identity on being indispensable, but Dr. Hartwell kept pushing her toward it. "You matter outside of what you produce," she would say. Vivian was trying to believe her. Iris threw her a small birthday party in March. 39 felt significant somehow, standing on the edge of 40, looking back at a decade that had reshaped her entire life. The gathering was intimate, just a handful of close friends, but Vivian found herself genuinely present for it, no longer performing the role of someone who had it all together, just being honest about the messy process of rebuilding. One of the guests, a colleague from work, mentioned seeing Graham at a conference the previous week. Vivian's heart had done something complicated in her chest, but she managed to ask how he seemed. Fine, apparently. Professional. Cordial. The word fine echoed in her head for days afterward. That night, after everyone left and Iris was cleaning up wine glasses, Vivian asked the question that had been building for months. "Do you think I made a mistake? With the divorce?" Iris paused, considering her answer carefully. "I think you both ran away from something. I don't know if it was a mistake, but I know you never actually talked about what was really wrong." The words hit harder than Vivian expected. Because Iris was right. They had never fought, never confronted, never dug into the uncomfortable truths hiding beneath their polite distance. They had just agreed it wasn't working and signed papers that made it official. But what if the not working wasn't about compatibility or falling out of love? What if it was about something neither of them had been brave enough to name? She couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea lodged itself in her mind and refused to leave. She started remembering moments she had glossed over during the marriage. The way Graham would sometimes look at her with something like longing, even though she was right there next to him. The times he would start to say something important, then stop himself and change the subject. Her own habit of filling silence with tasks and plans, never letting conversations go too deep. They had been experts at avoidance, she realized now. Masters of skating across the surface without ever diving into the depths. April arrived with cherry blossoms and longer days. Vivian had been divorced for 6 months. She had started painting regularly, had gone on a weekend hiking trip with Iris, had even looked at pianos online, though she hadn't bought one yet. She was building a life that felt more authentically hers than anything she had created during the marriage. But there was still this ache, this sense of something unfinished. Not regret exactly, but a question mark that wouldn't resolve itself into a period. She ran into one of Graham's colleagues at the grocery store on a rainy Saturday afternoon. They made awkward small talk in the produce section, and just as Vivian was about to escape, the woman said something that stopped her cold. "Graham mentioned he's been in therapy, working through some things. I thought that was really brave of him." Vivian had mumbled something polite and rushed away, but her hands were shaking as she loaded groceries into her car. Graham was in therapy. Graham, who had always been so self-contained, so private about his inner world, was sitting in some office talking about his feelings. The thought consumed her for days. What was he working through? Was it about the marriage? About her? She found herself wanting to know, needing to know, in a way that felt urgent and terrifying. Dr. Hartwell, during their next session, asked her why it mattered so much. Vivian struggled to articulate it. Because maybe he was discovering the same thing she was discovering. Maybe he was excavating his own buried parts and finding the same kinds of answers. Maybe they had both been running from something they needed to face. "Would you want to talk to him?" Dr. Hartwell asked. The question hung in the air. Would she? Breaking the clean separation felt dangerous, like reopening a wound that had barely started to heal. But the wound wasn't healed, Vivian realized. It had just been bandaged over with distance and avoidance, the same tools they had used in the marriage. Nothing was actually resolved. Nothing was actually finished. They had just stopped before getting to the truth. May brought unseasonably warm weather and a restlessness Vivian couldn't shake. She threw herself into her painting with renewed intensity, but the canvases that emerged were darker now, more turbulent, swirls of deep blues and grays, shapes that suggested storms and shadows. Dr. Hartwell asked her what the paintings were trying to say. Vivian didn't have an answer, but she kept painting them anyway, driven by something she couldn't name, but could feel building inside her chest like pressure before lightning. She thought about reaching out to Graham 100 times, picked up her phone, typed messages she never sent, rehearsed conversations in her head at 3 in the morning. But what would she even say? "Hi, I heard you're in therapy and I've been in therapy too, and maybe we should compare notes?" It sounded absurd. They had made their choice. Clean break. Move forward. Reopening communication felt like admitting they had gotten it wrong, and Vivian wasn't ready to face that possibility yet. Iris noticed her distraction during their weekly coffee meetup. They sat outside at a small cafe, spring sunshine warming their faces, and Iris studied her with the kind of knowing look that came from 20 years of friendship. "You're thinking about him again." It wasn't a question. Vivian sighed, stirring her coffee unnecessarily. "I can't stop wondering if we quit too early, if we took the easy way out instead of doing the hard work." "Divorce isn't easy," Iris said gently. "Ours was." The words came out harder than Vivian intended. "We were so civilized about it, so mature and reasonable. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe we needed to fight. Maybe we needed to get messy and angry and actually confront whatever we were both so afraid of." Iris reached across the table covering Vivian's hand with hers. "So, what are you going to do about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? Vivian had spent 6 months rebuilding herself, finding the pieces she had lost, learning to exist as just Vivian instead of Vivian and Graham. She was stronger now, clearer, more whole than she had been in years. But that wholeness came with a painful awareness of everything she had avoided before. And part of what she had avoided was the truth about why the marriage had actually fallen apart. She made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She would reach out to Graham, not to reconcile, not to restart anything, but to finish the conversation they had never actually started. To ask the questions they had been too scared to ask when they were still married. She drafted the message carefully, rewrote it a dozen times, finally settled on something simple and honest. "I've been doing a lot of thinking and therapy work about our marriage. I think there are things we never talked about, important things. Would you be willing to meet for coffee and have an honest conversation? No expectations, no agenda, just truth." She stared at the message for 10 minutes before hitting send. Her heart pounded as the little indicator showed it had been delivered, then showed he had read it. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, his response came through. "I've been hoping you might reach out." "Yes, I'd like that, very much." They met on a Tuesday evening at a neutral location, a quiet park near the river where neither of them had any particular memories. Vivian arrived early, sat on a bench overlooking the water, tried to calm her racing thoughts. When she saw Graham walking toward her, something in her chest clenched. He looked different, older, maybe, or just more present. The distant look he had worn for the last years of their marriage was gone, replaced by something more open, more vulnerable. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Then Graham spoke first. "I've missed you. Not just the marriage, or the life we had. You. Specifically, you." The honesty of it caught Vivian off guard. She had expected small talk, cautious circling around real topics. Instead, he had gone straight to the heart of it. She took a breath, decided to match his vulnerability. "I've missed you too, but I think I've spent the last 6 months realizing I didn't really know you. Or maybe I knew you, but never let myself see the parts that scared me." Graham nodded slowly. "My therapist keeps asking me why I left. Not why the marriage wasn't working, but why I specifically made the choice to leave when I did. And I keep avoiding the question because I know the answer, and it terrifies me." Vivian turned to look at him fully. His hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white with tension. She had seen him give presentations to rooms full of executives without breaking a sweat, but right now he looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to jump. "Tell me," she said softly. "Tell me the real reason." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. The river flowed past them, indifferent to human complications. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was afraid if I stayed, you would eventually see how broken I actually am, and I couldn't bear the thought of watching you realize you had married someone fundamentally damaged." The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Vivian felt something crack open inside her chest. Not pain exactly, but recognition. She reached for his hand without thinking, held it tightly. "Graham, I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone, not even Iris, not even my therapist until a month ago." He looked at her, waiting, and she saw in his eyes the same fear she felt, the fear of being truly seen and found wanting. But she had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. "I have spent my entire adult life terrified that I'm not enough, that if anyone really knew me, really saw all the insecure, anxious, messy parts I work so hard to hide, they would leave. So I perfected this version of myself, capable Vivian. Together, Vivian. Vivian who has everything under control. And I brought that performance into our marriage every single day." Her voice cracked, but she pushed forward. "I never let you see my fear because I thought if you knew how scared I was all the time, how much I questioned whether I deserved any of the good things in my life, you would realize you had made a mistake marrying me." Graham's hand tightened around hers. His eyes were bright, with unshed tears. "You thought you weren't enough?" "Every single day," Vivian whispered. "I thought I was one mistake away from you figuring out I was a fraud." They sat in stunned silence, the revelation settling over them like snow. All those years, all that distance, and they had been running from the same thing, wearing the same armor, protecting the same wounded parts. They had been so busy hiding their brokenness from each other that they had never realized they were both carrying identical fears. Graham's voice was rough when he finally spoke. "I left because I thought I was protecting you from my damage, but I was really just running away from the possibility that you might see me clearly and still choose to stay. That scared me more than anything. The idea that I might be worthy of that kind of love." "I let you leave," Vivian said, tears streaming down her face now, "because some part of me believed I deserved to be left, that it was only a matter of time before you saw through the performance and realized I wasn't who you thought I married." The truth of it was devastating and liberating all at once. They had destroyed their marriage, trying to protect each other from truths that weren't actually threatening. They had been so convinced of their own unworthiness that they had never given the other person a chance to love them as they actually were. Messy and scared and imperfect. "We wasted so much time," Graham said, his voice breaking. Vivian nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. They had wasted years hiding when they could have been healing together. Years performing when they could have been real. The weight of that loss pressed down on her, but underneath it was something else. A tiny spark of possibility. Because now they knew. Now the truth was out there between them, raw and painful, but finally honest. The sun was setting over the river, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They sat holding hands, two broken people who had finally stopped running long enough to see that they had been running from the same thing all along. The question now was what came next. Could you rebuild something from ruins this complete? Could two people who had failed each other so thoroughly find a way to try again? Vivian didn't know the answer, but for the first time in months, she felt something other than grief or confusion. She felt hope. They didn't make any decisions that night by the river. They simply sat together until the streetlights flickered on and the park began to empty, talking in a way they never had during 9 years of marriage. Graham told her about the panic attacks he had hidden, the nights he would sit in his car in the driveway for 20 minutes before coming inside, trying to compose himself into the version of himself he thought she needed. Vivian shared her own secrets, the shame she felt about never being satisfied with her accomplishments, the voice in her head that constantly told her she was one mistake away from everything falling apart. When they finally parted, there was no kiss, no promise of anything beyond agreeing to meet again. But as Vivian drove home, she felt lighter than she had in years. The secret she had carried for so long, the fundamental belief in her own inadequacy, had been spoken aloud, and the world hadn't ended. Graham hadn't recoiled in disgust or confirmed her worst fears. He had simply recognized her pain because it mirrored his own. She told Dr. Hartwell everything during their next session. The therapist listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. What you both described is called core shame, the deep-seated belief that there's something fundamentally wrong with you, something that makes you unworthy of love and connection. It's incredibly common and incredibly destructive when it goes unacknowledged. But why didn't we see it? Vivian asked, frustrated. How could we live together for 9 years and never realize we were both carrying the same wound? Because shame thrives in silence and secrecy, Dr. Hartwell explained. It convinces you that you're uniquely broken, that everyone else has it figured out. So you hide. You both hid so well from each other that you never realized you were hiding the same thing. Vivian absorbed this, thinking about all the ways she had constructed walls around her vulnerability, the perfectionism at work, the constant need to appear capable and together, the way she would deflect any conversation that got too close to her actual feelings. She had thought she was protecting herself, protecting her marriage. Instead, she had been slowly suffocating it. She and Graham started meeting regularly. Not dates exactly, but conversations that felt like archaeology. They excavated their shared past, looking at it with new eyes, finding patterns they had missed. The time Vivian had gotten a major promotion, and Graham had seemed distant for weeks afterward. She had thought he was jealous or unsupportive. Now he told her the truth. He had felt inadequate, like he wasn't keeping pace with her success, like eventually she would outgrow him. So he had withdrawn to protect himself from the inevitable rejection he was sure was coming. Or the time Graham had suggested they try for a baby, and Vivian had changed the subject, then kept changing it until he stopped bringing it up. She had thought she was being pragmatic, waiting for the right time. But the real reason, the one she could finally admit now, was that she was terrified of being a mother. Terrified she would fail at it, terrified she would pass on her anxieties and insecurities to another human being. So she had avoided the conversation entirely, and Graham had interpreted her avoidance as not wanting children with him specifically. Every revelation was painful, but there was something cleansing about it too, like lancing a wound that had been infected for years. They weren't just talking about what had gone wrong. They were learning how to be honest with each other for the first time, how to say the scared, ugly, vulnerable things and trust that the other person wouldn't weaponize them. Iris was cautiously supportive when Vivian told her what was happening. "I'm glad you're both finally being honest. But Vivian, honest conversations don't automatically fix everything. You can't just talk your way back into a marriage that ended for real reasons." "I know," Vivian said. "I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm just trying to understand it, to understand us." But that wasn't entirely true, and Iris knew it. There was something growing between her and Graham again, something that felt both familiar and completely new. It wasn't the easy romance of their early relationship or the comfortable routine of their marriage. It was rawer than that, built on a foundation of shared brokenness rather than projected perfection. Vivian didn't know what to do with these feelings. Moving forward felt risky. Moving backward felt impossible. Graham brought it up first, on a warm evening in late June. They were walking along the same river where they had first confessed their truths to each other. "I need to tell you something," he said, and the seriousness in his voice made Vivian's heart rate spike. "I'm falling in love with you again. Or maybe for the first time. The real you, not the version you thought you had to be. And I know that's complicated and maybe unwelcome, but I can't keep pretending I'm doing this just for closure." Vivian stopped walking. Her throat felt tight. "Graham, we're divorced. We signed papers. We divided our lives. You can't just decide you're in love with me and expect that to fix everything." "I'm not trying to fix everything," he said quietly. "I'm just telling you the truth. Because hiding how I feel, protecting you from my actual emotions, that's what destroyed us the first time. I won't make that mistake again." The honesty of it devastated her. Because he was right, and because she felt it too. This terrifying, exhilarating pull toward him, but admitting that felt like stepping off a cliff with no guarantee of anything but falling. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. Me too." He reached for her hand, the gesture so familiar yet so different from all the times he had held her hand during their marriage. "But I'd rather be scared and honest than safe and alone. I'd rather risk failing with you again than succeed at a life that doesn't include you." Vivian felt tears building. She had spent so many months rebuilding herself, finding her own identity, learning to be whole without him. Going back felt like betraying all that work. But maybe it wasn't about going back. Maybe it was about going forward with the tools they had both gained through loss and therapy and painful honesty. Maybe they could build something new from the ashes of what they had burned down. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know if we can do this." "Neither do I," Graham admitted, "but I know I want to try. Not because I need you to complete me, or because I can't survive alone. I've proven I can survive alone. But I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to build a life with someone who sees all of me, even the broken parts, and chooses to stay anyway. And the only person I want to build that life with is you." The words hit her like a wave. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, signing divorce papers with a steady hand and hollow relief. That woman had been so sure the marriage was over that they had nothing left to salvage. But that woman hadn't known the truth yet, hadn't excavated the real reasons everything fell apart, hadn't understood that sometimes you have to completely dismantle something before you can rebuild it properly. She looked at Graham, really looked at him, at the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope and fear mixed together. He wasn't asking her to go back to who they were before. He was asking her to be brave enough to try something entirely new, to build a relationship based on truth instead of performance, on acceptance instead of perfectionism, on showing up as their actual selves instead of the versions they thought they had to be. "I'm falling in love with you too," she finally said, the admission feeling like jumping off that cliff after all. "With this version of you who tells me the truth even when it's scary. But I need time. I need to know this isn't just us getting caught up in the emotion of all these revelations. I need to know we can actually do the work, not just talk about doing the work." Graham nodded, relief flooding his features. "Whatever you need, however long it takes. I'm not going anywhere." They stood by the river as the sun set, holding hands and facing an uncertain future. The path forward wasn't clear. There would be more therapy, more difficult conversations, more moments of doubt and fear. Rebuilding trust after breaking it so completely would take time and effort and constant vigilance. But for the first time since signing those divorce papers, Vivian felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at something real. They didn't rush. That was the first new rule they established together. No grand gestures, no moving back in together, no pretending the divorce hadn't happened. Instead, they started dating. Actually dating. Like two people getting to know each other for the first time. Graham picked her up for dinner on Friday evenings, brought flowers, asked her about her day, and actually listened to the answer. Vivian invited him to her painting studio, showed him the dark canvases she had created during their separation, explained what each color and brush stroke had meant when she couldn't find words for her pain. They went to couples therapy together, which felt surreal given they were technically no longer a couple. But Dr. Hartwell had recommended a colleague who specialized in relationship reconstruction, a kind-faced man named Dr. Miles Chen, who didn't seem fazed by their unusual situation. "You're not the first divorced couple to sit on this couch trying to figure out if they can try again," he told them during their first session. "And you won't be the last. The question isn't whether you loved each other once. The question is whether you can build something sustainable now, with all the knowledge you've gained." Summer turned to autumn. They celebrated Vivian's 40th birthday with a small gathering where Graham met the version of her life that existed without him. Her painting friends, her hiking group, the community she had built in his absence. He didn't try to insert himself into these spaces, just observed and appreciated this fuller, richer version of Vivian he had never known existed. She, in turn, went to one of his work events and saw him interact with colleagues who praised his recent promotion, his renewed energy, his willingness to mentor younger employees. This was a Graham she barely recognized, more confident and open than the man she had married. The hard conversations kept coming. They talked about children, really talked this time. Vivian explained her fears about motherhood, about passing on her anxieties, about failing at the one thing society told her she should naturally excel at. Graham admitted his own ambivalence, his worry that bringing a child into a shaky relationship would be unfair to everyone. They decided, together and honestly, that children might not be their path. And for the first time, that decision felt like freedom rather than failure. They talked about money and discovered they had completely different relationships with it. Graham, who had grown up wealthy, saw money as security, but also as something that could disappear without warning. His parents had lost everything in a business collapse when he was 12, and he had spent his adult life terrified of that happening again. Vivian, who had grown up working class, saw money as proof of worth, evidence that she had made something of herself. Their different anxieties had created tension they had never acknowledged, him wanting to save every penny, her wanting to spend to prove they had made it. They talked about sex, which made them both uncomfortable but felt necessary. The physical intimacy in their marriage had faded not because of lack of attraction, but because both of them had been performing rather than connecting. Vivian admitted she had often faked enthusiasm because she thought that's what good wives did. Graham confessed he had felt like he was constantly being evaluated, constantly failing some test he didn't understand. The honesty was mortifying, but also liberating. When they finally slept together again, months into their dating experiment, it was entirely different. Slower, more present, built on actual desire rather than obligation. Winter arrived again, marking a full year since their divorce had been finalized. They were sitting in Vivian's living room on a snowy December evening, drinking hot chocolate and watching the flakes fall outside the window. Graham had brought over his old record player and a collection of vinyl he had kept in storage. They were listening to an album from the early days of their relationship, and Vivian felt transported back to a time when everything had seemed possible. "I want to ask you something," Graham said, setting down his mug, "and I need you to be completely honest, even if the answer hurts." Vivian felt her stomach tighten but nodded. "Do you think we can really do this? Not just the dating and the therapy and the honest conversations, but actually build a life together again? Because I need to know if you believe it's possible, or if we're just delaying the inevitable second ending." She took her time answering, because he deserved honesty, not reassurance. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, so convinced the marriage was over, so certain they had nothing left to save. She thought about everything they had learned since then, all the walls they had dismantled, all the truths they had finally spoken. She thought about the fear that still lived in her chest, the voice that sometimes whispered she would mess this up, that she didn't deserve a second chance at happiness. But she also thought about the painting she had completed last week, not dark and stormy like the ones from her early separation, but full of light and color and movement. She thought about the way Graham had looked at it and immediately understood what she was trying to express. She thought about the morning he had shown up at her door with coffee and bagels just because he knew she had a difficult work presentation. She thought about the couples therapy session where they had both cried and then laughed and then held each other while Dr. Chen smiled knowingly from his chair. "I think we already are doing it," Vivian said finally. "We've been doing it for months, building something new from the pieces of what broke. And yes, I'm still scared sometimes. Yes, I still have moments where I worry I'm not enough, or that you'll wake up one day and realize this was a mistake. But those moments are getting smaller. And when they come, I tell you about them instead of hiding them. That's the difference." Graham's eyes were bright with emotion. "I want to marry you again." The words hung in the air between them. Vivian's heart was racing. "Graham!" "Not now," he said quickly. "Not until we're both ready. Maybe not for years. But eventually, when we've proven to ourselves that this isn't just nostalgia or fear of being alone, I want to stand in front of people who love us and make promises I actually know how to keep this time. Promises built on who we really are, not who we think we should be." Vivian felt tears streaming down her face. "I want that too. Someday, when we've earned it." He moved closer, cupping her face in his hands. "We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have bad days and stupid fights, and moments where we forget everything we've learned. I know, but I promise you this." His voice was steady, certain. "I will never hide from you again. I will never let shame and fear turn me into a stranger. I will show up as myself, messy and imperfect, and sometimes broken, and trust that you'll love me anyway. And I promise," Vivian whispered, "to let you see me, really see me. The scared parts and the ambitious parts and the parts that don't make sense. I promise to stop performing and start living." They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Not the desperate passion of their early relationship or the obligatory affection of their failing marriage. This was something entirely new, a kiss that tasted like truth and second chances and hard-won hope. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in white. Inside, two people who had lost each other sat holding hands in the warm glow of lamplight, building something stronger than what they had before. Because they had learned the secret that too many people never discover. Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who will stand with you in your imperfection and choose you anyway. It's about being brave enough to tear down the walls you've spent your whole life building and trust that what's underneath is worthy of being seen. Vivian looked at Graham, at this man she had married and divorced, and was slowly, carefully falling in love with all over again, and felt something settle in her chest. Not the hollow relief of their divorce or the anxious performance of their marriage, but genuine peace. They had taken the long way around to get here, through pain and separation and brutal honesty. But maybe that was the only way they could have arrived at this moment. Maybe they had needed to completely fall apart to learn how to truly come together. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For coming back. For being brave enough to tell me the truth. For loving the real me instead of the version I thought I had to be." Graham smiled, that genuine smile she had fallen in love with years ago, the one she was learning to trust again. "Thank you for letting me, for doing the work, for giving us a second chance we probably didn't deserve, but definitely needed." They sat together as the evening stretched into night, making plans for the future that felt real this time. A vacation in the spring to Maine, where they had honeymooned, but this time without expectations or performance. Thanksgiving with both their families, being honest about their unconventional situation instead of hiding it. Moving in together, eventually, when they were both ready, but keeping some separateness too, some space for the individual people they had worked so hard to become. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust never is. But they had tools now that they hadn't possessed before. Therapy and honesty and the hard-earned understanding that hiding from each other was more dangerous than any truth they could speak. They had learned to communicate in crisis, and now they needed to learn to communicate in peace. To maintain this vulnerability and openness, not just when everything was falling apart, but when everything was coming together. As Vivian fell asleep that night, Graham's steady breathing beside her, she thought about the woman who had signed divorce papers with a steady hand and hollow heart. She wanted to tell that woman it would be okay, that the ending she thought was final was really just a necessary demolition, clearing space for something better to grow, that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what's truly worth keeping, that the deepest love isn't found in perfection, but in the courage to be imperfectly, authentically, vulnerably yourself with another person who's brave enough to do the same. Their story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But this time, they were writing it together, with honesty as their foundation and hope as their guide. And that made all the difference. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.